today's event is really about bringing people together in solidarity across Ireland, people who have a lived experience of disability, those of us who know people with disabilities and who want to act as allies in solidarity with the disability community, to bring this issue to political attention. There are over 600,000 people with disabilities living in Ireland, so it's a sizable minority, but yet it is one of the groups that is least visible, I guess, in the political space, and that's something that today we're trying to change, and it's also something that Disable Inequality as a campaign is trying to change. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our first speaker. We have a session of individual speakers first, then we're going to have a musical performance from Music Together, and then at the end we're going to have a panel discussion with an open Q&A from the floor. So, our first speaker this morning is Elaine Howley, who is a board member of the Disability Federation of Ireland and is the CEO of NCBI Services. Over to you, Elaine.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see so many people here this morning. I know that many of you have travelled from across the country. Many of you have had to make great sacrifices to get here, and all of you have been waiting far too long for this campaign. Today's launch is about two core human rights issues: disability and inequality. It says it right there in the title. With just two words, this campaign tells us that it is not the disability that we live with that is disabling. It is the inequality that we live with that is disabling. And with those two little words, we also get the solution. That we have to disable inequality. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's fundamental, and it is time. There are over 600,000 people in Ireland living with a disability, as Eleanor has already said. That's 13% of us. 2 out of every 3 people know or care for an immediate family member, a friend or a neighbour living with a disability. If we were a constituency, we would greatly outnumber the whole of Connacht. We would even challenge the greater Dublin area. But we are set apart from other electoral constituencies where local candidates are already knocking on doors. We are set apart because we are located across the country, in every constituency, in every townland, and in every village. There is something ironic in the fact that our very prevalence, our existence everywhere, has also made us politically invisible. We are also set apart because we are one of the most marginalised constituencies in the country. Just imagine any other constituency where 71% of the people of working age are unemployed. Imagine a constituency where only 1 in every 2 people continue education beyond secondary school. Imagine a constituency where the majority of people can't take a bus or train without giving 24-hour notice. 24 hours notice. That is, if they can take a bus or train at all. Disability is the biggest single issue of our time. It affects almost every family and is increasing as Ireland's population ages. It is increasing significantly. Yet, disability has never received the political leadership, attention, and commitment that it needs to make Ireland a truly modern, truly democratic, truly equal republic. Until now, that is, because Disable Inequality changes everything. It unites us, it makes us a constituency that cannot be ignored. It gives us one powerful collective voice, one clear aim and one vision. When we speak with one voice, they will not just hear us, they will have to listen. In developing Disable Inequality, we carried out research with voters who were not living directly with disability. We wanted to test the fundamental truth and principles we felt were at stake. The research backed up our thinking that what was at stake was a sense of inequality. For voters, it was all about answering the question, does that seem fair to you? And the best way to answer that question is by using our stories. Our individual stories and our collective story of bias, discrimination and segregation. I am a member of the board of the Disability Federation of Ireland, and I'm also CEO of NCBI Services. Let me just share with you some of the issues that I and the people with whom I work have to deal with every day. I'm fortunate because I live in an area with a public transport service. I can use the free travel scheme that is available to me, for which I'm very grateful. But there are difficulties with this. Many DART and train stations have been, in many DART and train stations, staff have been replaced by no staff. There are barriers. There are exits through which people have endless difficulty getting through when there's no staff there. Ironically, as a member of the Department of Transport's Accessibility Committee, I have been forced to jump the barrier on more than one occasion. When I get to the platform, for example, in Pearse or Connolly Station, I'm reliant on audible announcements. These are often not working, which means I have no idea whether the approaching train is for Dundalk or Maynooth or Belfast. And believe me, there is a difference. It does change one's day if one gets on the wrong train. Then when I'm on board the train, I and many others need audible announcements to tell us where we are. Invariably, these are either switched off, heading in the opposite direction, or 2 stops behind. This lack of audible information is not unique to transport systems. Regularly, I hear stories about audible signals at traffic lights being switched off by local authorities. This leaves people with sight loss to either take their lives into their own hands or wait endlessly on the side of the main road until somebody else arrives to respond to a request for help. Imagine the uproar on the Joe Duffy show if this situation was to be faced by the general public every day. Perhaps the biggest issue is that these access systems are often installed at great public expense, but they are switched off, or when they are in disrepair, they're not repaired. They are simply not monitored. Systems are wonderful, but services are what we need. And most of all, continuity of reliable services upon which we can depend. At a most basic level of access, magnification aids and technical aids are no longer being funded in many areas by the medical card system or the HSE. The daily reality for people who can't afford what they need is isolation, lack of access to basic information, loneliness, discrimination based on where people live, and segregation. But the next government can change this. It can demonstrate its ambition and its commitment to the people with whom we work, to me and to you, by ensuring that the following 3 priorities are in the new programme for government. So what would that mean? Number 1, we need leadership with the establishment of a Cabinet Minister for Disability. Number 2, we need fair income and real work opportunities for people who live with disability. And number 3, we need the guarantee of independence, of access, and of choice in our communities where we live, where we vote. The last 8 years of recession have had a disproportionate and brutal impact on the lives of people with disabilities, and I'm sure many of you don't need me to tell you that. Disable inequality in election 2016 gives us an opportunity to change this, to change futures, to come together from the ground up and to end discrimination. I urge you all to get actively involved in this campaign. So what can you do? 3 things. You can tell your story, you can contact your candidates, and thirdly, you can vote to end discrimination and ask others to do the same by voting for candidates who will put disability first. Disable Inequality is telling candidates in every constituency that we are here to stay, that we are not invisible, that we have a story to tell, and that we have one strong, united voice. One story at a time, we are making equality a defining issue in election 2016. One vote at a time, we will disable inequality.
Thanks, Elaine. Our next speaker is Louise Bruton, who might be more well known to many of you as the author of the brilliant blog Legless in Dublin. Louise is an avid tweeter and a pop fan and a music journalist, but she also writes about access and living in a wheelchair in Dublin. So I'm just going to get a mic from over here for Louise.
Hello. When you are disabled, When you are disabled, you live in a different city to everybody else. No matter how long you've lived there, and no matter how well you think you know it, it's not the same city. You have less options, and your days are determined by the decisions of somebody else. When you are disabled, you can't just stroll into any pub, bar, restaurant, or cafe when you meet up with friends. To make it from one side of the Liffey to the other, you have to carefully plan your route to avoid the step-filled Haypenny Bridge, the cobblestoned Temple Bar, or the pathways along the quays that are too narrow because of overgrown tree roots. When you are disabled, you always have to take the long way around to get to the exact same point as everybody else. Before I started using a wheelchair, I had 23 years of experience using crutches, and that's how I knew the city then, as a crutches user. Although they weren't embraced with loving arms, stairs weren't an issue for me then, but if it rained, wet floors, pathways, and fallen leaves became a huge hazard for me. I could go almost anywhere that I wanted to, as long as I could be dropped right to the front door and had a crafty place to lean. When the wheelchair became a full-time fixture, I had to discover my city all over again. I had to say no an awful lot more too. I ended up staying in more than I did going out, and the places that I had loved and would have gone to every week were now off limits to me. Steps, stairs, too crowded, no accessible bathroom, or even too far away from any public transport route meant that I had to rethink everything. I had to go online and research before I could give a yes or a no to someone. I had to put in hours of planning for a simple cup of coffee, and that isn't fair. The word equality has gained so much strength in Ireland lately. Yes, equality was blazoned across the country in May of last year, making Ireland the first country in the world to vote in same-sex marriage. 2015 was, in many ways, the year for equality in Ireland. But if we could continue on flying that flag this year, we could disable inequality for the 13% of people living in Ireland with a disability. My big area when it comes to disability is access. With every review I put up on my site, Legless in Dublin, I am basically asking places to let me in. So as politicians are stepping back into the government today, and as they go around shaking hands and kissing the heads of babies during the campaign period, we need to remind them with Disable Inequality to let us in. In Dublin, there are a number of places like the Lighthouse Cinema, Honest to Goodness Cafe, Manning's Bakery, and the 3 Arena, who are all doing their best to be as accessible as possible. But people with disabilities are still living in a smaller city to everyone else. Our lives and interests should not be limited to a handful of places. At the moment, it costs €800 to apply for a Disability Access Certificate, which you need if you're to follow Part M of the Building Regulations Act. For big corporations or franchises, €800 is nothing, but for small businesses or sole traders, it's a lot, and allowances should be made for those who want to make a difference. The discrimination and injustice that people with disabilities and their loved ones face day in, day out is unbelievable. Last week, I was contacted by a woman who has a 5-year-old son and he uses a wheelchair. At the moment, he's not old enough to go out socialising by himself, but when that time comes, she wants to be prepared. She wants to know what she can do now to make sure that he won't be excluded when he's older. Every parent worries about their child, how they'll get on in school, will they have nice friends, will they be interested in sport or music or art or reading or all of the above. But how many parents have to go around their village knocking on doors to ask if places would maybe consider making their places accessible so that their child can go and play with their friends? That is not fair. The feeling of being left out or excluded is unfortunately the norm for us. Whenever a friend of mine is angered by the fact that a lift is broken or that a wheelchair bathroom has been used as a storage closet, I'm reminded that it shouldn't be this way and I shouldn't be treated like this. Making space for someone in a wheelchair or assisting someone with any disability shouldn't feel like a chore. We, the 13% in 2016, shouldn't have to feel excluded anymore. When you are disabled, your independence is the most important thing to you. For me, the moments that leave me feeling isolated are a direct result of someone else's poor planning. It's not fair that my perfectly planned day can be completely thrown off because of an inaccessible train station, a flight of stairs with no lift in sight, or bin bags blocking up a footpath in the city centre, leaving me always to help from a stranger. When you are disabled, you live in a different city to everyone else, and it's about time that we change that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tom Clonan. Tom is a retired army officer with experience of conflict in Ireland, the former Yugoslavia and the Middle East, and he writes on international terrorism and security for the Irish Times. Tom is also a parent of his son Owen and a carer for Owen, who's 13 and lives with a rare neuromuscular disorder. And Tom is an independent candidate running for the Seanad. Over to you.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here in the Atrium in Trinity. I'm running as an independent candidate for the Senate on the Trinity panel, and I promise I won't turn this into a political broadcast. So listen, I want to thank DFI for inviting me here, and thank you all for coming along, and I'll try to be brief. It's 2016. It's finally arrived, 100 years after the rising down on O'Connell Street. And what kind of a republic do we have? Well, someone says it's the best little country in the world to do business in. But as you know, and as I know, Ireland is one of the worst countries in the developed world to be disabled, to be vulnerable, to be homeless, to be an elderly patient on a trolley. So we really need to fundamentally reboot Ireland and disable inequality. And it's not an issue that confronts carers like myself, people with disabilities. It's a societal issue. And last year, we did the right thing for our gay, lesbian, and LGBT brothers and sisters. We voted yes for marriage equality, not to do them a favour, not because we felt sorry for them, but because it's a fundamental human right, and we needed to empower them. And this year, that's what we have to do for our disabled brothers and sisters, people who are different through no choice of their own. We have to disable inequality and do the right thing. And I applaud DFI in their campaign to disable inequality, to make this a defining campaign issue. We have 600,000 people 200, affected by disability. We have 250,000 carers, myself included. We have to mobilise that as a political force because, ladies and gentlemen, the political will exists, despite austerity, to put a water meter outside every house in this republic. We need to mobilise that ingenuity, that skill, those resources to do the right thing for people with disabilities. We need to disable inequality. In terms of my own story, in the context of let's disable inequality one story at a time, my son Owen, he's 13, diagnosed at 18 months with a neuromuscular disease. And that propelled us into this invisible community, into this community where there is so little understanding and recognition of the different city that we inhabit, the different republic that we live in. Owen attends secondary school now, and recently, and such a struggle to get him into second level through primary school, to the fight for special needs assistance, the fight for access. He's a wheelchair user, he's partially sighted, he's a constellation of challenges, but he's a beautiful young man, and he wants to be an active and fully participative citizen in this republic. And in September, I was asked by an assistive technology provider, look, we can't give you all of the curriculum, so pick 3 subjects from the curriculum that you think are the most important, and we'll give you those. No, I was enraged. Imagine if my son was black, or if he was gay, or if he was a Muslim. Would you make a child make that choice on that basis? But because he has a disability, he is routinely and casually discriminated against. And Owen always says to me, it's okay, Dad, don't get angry. But I am angry. I'm absolutely enraged by this casual, routine discrimination. As a Dubliner myself, and everybody here in the room, you'll be aware that the Natural History Museum, not far from here, it's a rite of passage for most Dublin kids and kids from all around the country. The Dead Animal Museum, as we call it in Dublin. And I bring my 4 children there. And Owen wanted to go upstairs to see the wolves, the primates, and there is no lift in the Natural History Museum. So I had to carry Owen up the stairs. I had to put the brakes on his wheelchair at the bottom of the curving stone staircase. I had to lift him up in my arms, carry him up the stone staircase, and when I got to the top, I had to lie him down on the floor, my precious boy, down there in the dirt and the dust on the floor, people looking at me, taking photographs with their cell phones. And then I had to go downstairs, pick up his wheelchair and carry it up the stairs, and then lift him up off the ground, put him into the wheelchair, just so that he could see the monkeys and the wolves in the glass cases. And I was told by a public representative that, well, you know, in fairness, it's a listed building. We can't put a lift into a listed building. My child is listed as a citizen of this republic. And like everyone in this room, he has a right and an entitlement to go up and see the things and participate the things and experience all of the things that his brothers and sisters do. And similarly, travelling on public transport, the staff are wonderful, but we do have to make a phone call to the station master in Pearse Station 24 hours before we can travel. Imagine any other citizen that had to do that. And the staff are wonderful, but because of cutbacks and austerity, they just don't have the personnel to crew the stations, to carry the ramps. I know I'm speaking to people who are far more experienced in this area. Owen is a teenager now, he's 13. And I'm an embarrassment, frankly. He'd like to go into town on his own and have a hot chocolate with his friends, but he can't. I have to go with him, because either there's nobody in the DART station to get a ramp for him, or the lift is broken. And many an evening I've taken him home, and in the rain and the wind we have to go on to the next DART station, or even 2 DART stations, and then wait for another DART to bring us back to our own station because the lifts are broken. So what I'm saying to you is, consistent with DFI's message, 2016 has to be a turning point. And Irish people are fantastic. They respond to issues. They may be disillusioned with politics. There may be a disconnect with the various parties and the punch-and-judy politics that we have become so acquainted with. But people are good on issues. And we have to make disability one of the defining equality issues of this centenary of the Rising. And I would ask you, in this community, you know, let's start by using this community, harnessing its power to put pressure on our elected representatives to make these issues a defining election issue. And I would ask all of you, if you have any family member or friend, or if somebody on your street is a Trinity graduate, tell them about my campaign. I am motivated solely as a parent of a child with disabilities to get into Leinster House and start taking names and kicking ass. I'm sorry to use that language, but that's what we really need to do. We've got to create the political will. We have to create an Ireland where it would be completely unacceptable to say to a child in a wheelchair, you can only access this amount of the curriculum. That's what we have to do. 2016 will be a turning point. I would ask you to spread the word about my campaign, and please support DFI. All of the journalists here, please spread the word in relation to transforming the narrative around inequality. Let's disable inequality. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Our next speaker is Ellen Keane. Ellen was Ireland's youngest athlete when she performed in the Beijing Paralympic Games at the age of 13. She's currently preparing for Rio, and she's also just finished her exams in DIT. So welcome, Ellen.
Hi, thank you for having me. I suppose I'm a bit different from a lot of people here. I don't really suffer a lot from all this inequality I've heard of. I was born with no arm. I was born with this disability, and my parents were never really given a reason as to why. My arm just stopped growing, and it's something I've had to deal with my whole life. As I got older and as I went through the teenage years, I became really, really insecure about it. I would wear my sleeve down all the time. I would try to fit in. I felt a need to be normal, and the more I did that, the more paranoid I became. Schools were the worst, big groups, because people just weren't used to it. People only, when they thought of disabilities, they'd think of people in wheelchairs, people with sight loss or hearing loss, and I suppose I was more of a minority. And the only place that I fully felt comfortable was in the pool. Swimming kind of made me comfortable in my own skin, and it was the only place I couldn't hide, because all I had was my swimsuit, my hat, and my goggles. And as I got more and more involved in the sport, I got to represent my country all over the world, and I got to meet great people with the same disability as myself, all with one arm. And I think that gave me made me more comfortable and gave me a lot more courage to go out with no sleeves on. And the more I went out with no sleeves on, the less paranoid I became, because people were just so much more acceptance. And I think young people of today are very acceptance to disability. And I think people with disability themselves, they need to just go out there and show themselves and be like, this is who I am, to be able to gain that self-esteem. It made me really, really sad. Recently I met a little girl, she was 4 years old, and her mom told me that she goes around with her sleeve down because she's so insecure and she just wants to be normal, she just wants to fit in. And I think we need to educate Ireland on the other types of disabilities that there are. There are people out there with these problems, and they just want to feel normal, and they don't want to be stared at. They don't want to be whispered behind their back. And I think that's the one thing I became so paranoid about. The most inequality thing I think I've ever experienced is when I was buying a car. Being right-handed and only having a right hand, I have to drive an automatic. I don't have a choice. So automatically that is double the price of a normal car. I need adaptions to my wheel, I need adaptions to my handbrake, and people with these needs for their car, they are entitled to the primary medical cert, which gives you tax off to be able to afford your car, to be able to afford all these adaptions. But to get that, the criteria is that you need to have 2 hands impaired, 2 legs impaired, or 1 leg impaired, and obviously I don't fit into that criteria. So I went and I appealed this, and I had to sit in front of 3 doctors. And one of the doctors asked me why I don't wear a prosthetic. And I told them I just wasn't comfortable in it. It wasn't part of me. I feel comfortable in my own skin. And he said, well, why not? You'd look so much better with a prosthetic on and no one would know that you had one arm. And I was rejected this. So on a daily basis, if I go into a shop and I have a trolley load of food, trying to control that to the car is very difficult, or parking in a tight car park space and trying to get out without hitting the other car is something I'd struggle with. And it's just these little things that they're only little, but they do have a great impact on my life. And I think if a politician were to try change something, particularly for me, I'd ask them to look at the criteria for the primary medical cert and update it, because there are people out there who need this, and I'm one of them. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ellen. Our final speaker from this session is Marion Maloney, who is a disability activist and campaigner and very involved with the independent living movement. So over to you, Marion.
Hi, everybody. Oops, microphone is here. Okay. Now, just 1 second until I get this guy sitting down. There you go, and you stay there. Yeah. So one rule is, please do not distract my guide dog while he's sitting there. I hope everybody can hear me okay. It's an honour and a privilege to be here to speak at this morning. When I got the call yesterday, I thought, oh, mother of God, what am I going to say? I've no speech ready. I have no PowerPoint presentation, so whatever comes out, comes out. I've been so impressed listening to the speakers before me, and I was trying to take my notes in my head and try and be able to link in with things that has gone before me. But I stand before you today as a normal woman. My eyes don't work right, but I have stopped apologising for that, because for a great number of years I used to always put that word, I'm sorry, I can't see. But guys, guess what? I'm not sorry anymore, I can't see. It's great that I can't see the crowd that's out there. I'm standing here in my own cloud and I don't know who's there. So I know I'm talking to the converted and, but we all need a choice in our life. And I suppose I was very, very lucky. When I was diagnosed at the age of 12 with my own vision impairment, now Jason said to me yesterday, give us a bit of your own story. Now, if I was to tell you my own story, you'd be here till probably 10 o'clock tonight. So I'll try and just fast forward a little bit in that I was born in Sligo. I now live in Galway. I was diagnosed with my vision impairment at the age of 12. The ophthalmologist turned around to my mother, who was shortly before that made a widow with 3 young children, so she had a lot to cope with, and she didn't want to hear, your daughter's gone blind. Now, we got no support. I thought blindness was blackness until the age of 40, when I met somebody who had lost her own sight down through the years, and she said, well, when I first went to her house, I said, well, I hope the Lord takes my life before he takes my sight. And she said, why would you say a thing like that? Well, I said, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other. She said, stop. You stop focusing on what you can't do and you focus on what you can do. Now, mind you, at that stage, I had a very successful Irish dancing school. I had got married. I had five children, who are now 5 young adults, 3 sons and 2 daughters, and I now have 2 grandsons. So I am a normal woman. My eyes don't work right. But the barriers that are out there, as you all know, anybody that has an impairment, the barriers and the attitudes and the assumptions people make about us is really getting to me as I get older. Because so many people say to me, oh, that's a lovely dog. Are you training him? I said, no, he's my guide dog. And they say, oh, well, you don't look blind. And I said, well, how am I meant to look? You know, I'm sure there's plenty of you in the room today that have things like that said to them on a daily basis. And it's really getting to me that we constantly have to remind people. I'm very involved in Galway in different things. I won't go into the list of things now, but I find myself sitting at tables with city councillors. And a very simple thing like that, if everybody would introduce themselves around the table, because when there's somebody across the floor from you, you can't see them, and if you don't recognise the voice, then you haven't a clue who's there. So a simple little thing that you go around the room and just introduce yourself and what organisation you come from. A city councillor a couple of months back said, "Mr. Chair, do we really have to do this?" he says. And there was a person sitting beside me that said, "Oh, Jesus, what is Marion going to say when it comes to her turn?" So, of course, I did introduce myself, but I had it out with him and named the person who will remain nameless today. But I met him last month, and he comes over and he tipped me on my shoulder, "Marion, it's you-know-who," and introduced himself. So, it's, I suppose, by our own attitude as well, we get the message out. I think to get onto this campaign, Disable Inequality, when I first heard Martin Naughton talking about this, I said, yes, at long last, we are going to get an organisation that's going to really, fight for equality for us. We want a minister for disability. Disability is not going away. There is no cure. I'm sure there's quite a lot of people. I'll just speak about myself. I know that I was brought to Lourdes years and years ago, brought several times. Every time I went to Lourdes, I said, "Come on now, will you give me a bit of sight now this time? Maybe I'll see a bit more when I go home," kind of thing, But I realised after maybe third or fourth time there, well, I may not get a little bit more sight, but by God, do I have vision. My vision for Ireland and my vision for this campaign is that we will mobilise people with disabilities right around this country. Can you imagine if we all stand shoulder to shoulder and get out there and cast our vote and get our candidates to make our polling booths accessible for us that we can get in? Mind you, they won't have the technology for me to cast my vote, but I have no problem going into the returning officer and saying, "Can I have assistance? Will you fill this up for me?" I've done it before. I've always cast my vote, and Yaz will be with me. But I think for us to get, people have mentioned the campaign last year, which was absolutely fantastic. And exactly what that man said, we don't want people to feel sorry for us. And we don't want charity. We want our rights. We want our human rights. We are citizens of this country. We have a vote to cast. We have plenty of friends and relations that we can get on this Disable Inequality and get our minister. Some people would say, "Oh, well, sure, if you have a minister for disability, wouldn't you want a minister for older people? And you want a minister for this, that, and the other?" Well, my answer to them is, we need a designated minister for disability, because our needs are across the board in every single department, and there is no coordination that I know of going on at the moment. We need for our young people, and I was delighted to hear that gentleman talking about his son, because that's the reason I'm involved in the disability sector. It's the reason I've always been, as a mother of 5 beautiful children. Thank God their sight is brilliant. If down the road that they have children, they may have vision impairment. We don't know. I have 2 grandsons. There's a great check being kept on them. One little boy is wearing glasses at the minute just for a little problem. But the awareness that child has in relation to Nana's eyes don't work right. I mean, if I told you all the stories I have about him, we'd be here all day and all night. But if we get and raise that awareness and teach young children about the difference in people, I think we'll go a long, long way, and we'll have a new Ireland and new people. So we need to educate our young people so that we won't, hopefully, in another 100 years be having this. I know there's a lot of us in the room probably won't even be around in another 100 years, but sure, we're living longer anyway, you never know. I told them to make sure and tell me when to shut up, so I don't know who's going to give me a tip on the shoulder here. So listen, what I want you all to do is go back to your own constituency, get to know your candidates, and disable inequality. Thank you.